Look at verse 15 again. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. So the second half of the tribulation will begin with the abomination of desolation. And Jesus tells us in verse 15, if you don't know what that is, go back and read the book of Daniel. You know, you have to study the Old Testament to understand the New Testament. You have to study the Old Testament to understand the New Testament. That's one of the reasons why we go through the Old Testament on Thursday nights, because it gives us the foundation and context for the New Testament. The Bible is an integrated book. You have to study it from Genesis to Revelation to really understand the message of the Bible. Jesus here in verse 14, he points us back to the book of Daniel. And the abomination of desolation is mentioned in 3 places in the book of Daniel. If you're taking notes, it's mentioned in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. It's also mentioned in Daniel chapter 11, verse 31. And it's mentioned in Daniel chapter 12, verse 11. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 tells us that a world leader that the Bible calls the Antichrist, and that's what he's most commonly referred to, this world leader called the Antichrist will come on the scene in the last days of this age, and he will confirm a 7-year covenant. And the confirmation of that covenant will mark the beginning of the 7-year tribulation. And as part of that covenant, the Jewish people will be allowed to rebuild a temple or build a tabernacle in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, and they will be allowed to reestablish their sacrificial worship again. The last Jewish temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 A.D., and there has not been a Jewish temple since that time. But the Jewish people will be allowed to rebuild their temple in the last days of this age. Look at verse 15 again. The abomination of desolation will take place in that temple. He says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the where? The holy place. The holy place is the Holy of Holies in the temple. So this assumes there will be a temple in the last days. There isn't a temple right now. There hasn't been a temple since 70 AD, but this assumes there will be a temple. There's an organization in Jerusalem called the Temple Institute that is actively working toward the building of a new Jewish temple. They have already made all of the utensils and furniture and priestly garments for this future temple. And this past September, just 2 months ago, there were 5 red heifers delivered to rabbis in Israel. And red heifers are required for the purification and dedication of a new temple. Numbers chapter 19. Red heifers are very, very rare, extremely rare. But now suddenly there are 5 red heifers. And those red heifers have been delivered over to rabbis in Israel. And they're needed for the dedication of a temple. I have a newspaper article for you if you want to bring that up. This is from the Jerusalem Post. This isn't a Christian publication. This is the Jerusalem Post. Look at the headline. From Texas to Israel, red heifers needed for temple arrive. And so here it's describing this farmer in Texas who happened to raise 5 red heifers. And he delivered them to Israel, to rabbis in Israel. And there's a picture of a rabbi examining one of the red heifers in Israel. By the way, that red heifer that's in the picture there, its name is Zipporah. Remember from our study on Thursday night, if you were on Zipporah, we were here last Thursday, we talked about Zipporah, the wife of Moses. She was pretty handy with a sharp stone, if you were here. There's a desire for a temple among many of the Jewish people. A few years ago, there was a presentation made to the American ambassador to Israel from a group of rabbis, and they presented him with a photograph, an aerial photograph of the Temple Mount, but they had photoshopped a temple into the picture in the place of the Dome of the Rock. And it was quite a controversy because the ambassador didn't realize what was on the picture, and there he was holding this picture, having his photo taken. It's a picture of the temple on the Temple Mount in place of the Dome of the Rock. So it was very upsetting for many. There are many Jewish people today who believe a temple will somehow bring the world together and bring peace and unity to the world. The Temple Institute that I mentioned a few moments ago, they have videos where they're going out in the streets of Jerusalem, going out in the streets of Tel Aviv, just kind of a man on the street interviewing Jews on the street and asking them about a third temple, the building of a temple. And so many people in these interviews are saying that they believe that this will bring the world together. If we have a temple again, that it will bring peace to the world. If there's a temple. And so we see that piece of the end times puzzle coming into place. Now, what is the abomination of desolation mentioned here in verse 15? Halfway into the 7-year covenant that allows the Jews to rebuild their temple and reinstitute the sacrifices, Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 says the Antichrist will cause the sacrifices to cease, and he will set up some kind of statue or idol in the holy place of the temple, and he will demand to be worshipped as God. Notice in verse 15, Jesus says, when you see it standing in the holy place. So it seems to be some kind of idol or image that will be set up in the holy place, in the Holy of Holies of the last days temple. Daniel chapter 11, verse 36 says, the Antichrist will do as he pleases, exalting himself and claiming to be greater than every god, even blaspheming the God of gods. The Apostle Paul talks about this in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. There in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul calls this last world leader the man of sin and the son of perdition. And Paul says he will exalt himself and defy everything that people call God and every object of worship. He will even sit in the temple of God, claiming that he himself is God.